You're going to deal with rejection constantly. Not just rejection, but people who, frankly, they don't like you, they don't like your business, they don't like what you're doing. Maybe they just don't even like your aspirations or the things you talk about. All that to say, you have to know that if you're going to be successful, there will always be people who don't like what you're doing, and that's okay. Hey, today's episode, we're digging into one of our old episodes on the Good Advice podcast when I was young and spry. This episode's from, 6 years ago, I guess. And we'll be diving into this conversation exactly. But before we do, here's a word from one of the incredible businesses that sponsors the podcast. Check this out and enjoy this episode. Life is constantly moving quickly. And in fact, I find myself more and more wanting a pause button to capture some of those special memories with my family. That's why I love what the team at Duncan & Stone is doing. They've created high-quality keepsake journals for every stage of life. From people who are freshly engaged all the way to welcoming their first child, Duncan & Stone has a series of journals that are incredible for capturing some of those precious memories, and not just memories, but the stories and conversations that you want to have with your loved ones one day. Personally, I love the Dear Daughter Journal because it captures all of the amazing memories that I want to be able to tell my daughter Maylee one day. The team at Duncan & Stone understands the value of keeping these memories close to home. That's why they've spared no expense in creating high-quality journals that are designed in-house because they know how precious these memories are. Check out DuncanandStone.com and see some of the journals that will walk you through every stage of life. They're easy to use and beautiful to display, and most importantly, they capture what matters. Again, go to DuncanandStone.com to find out more. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of my podcast. I am very excited to be sharing with you a topic for discussion today that I have, it's funny, I wasn't really thinking about actually doing a podcast episode today in general, but also not even on this topic. And then I saw two things that one of them popped up on my news feed on Facebook, and the other one was an actual news article that I was reading this morning. And both of them were related to each other, and they were so compelling that I thought, you know what, I really need to jump on the microphone and record an episode on this topic of, and I don't even really know what to call it. I don't know if I should call it like rejection or likability or, the path to success and all the haters that you will develop along the way. But before I get into any of that, before I even start talking about that, hopefully your 2019 is going pretty well so far. Hopefully you are, your business is successful, your personal relationships are growing in their value. And definitely, as you're thinking about 2019 in general, obviously it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. You got 12 months to get to wherever you want to be at the end of 2019. It's not something that you don't have to be there tomorrow, right? And on the same token, you want to balance that with intentionality and assertiveness. You don't want to be the person who you wait till December of 2019 to actually do something towards your goals. But definitely in general, it's been exciting to see how my company, Good Advice, how the momentum has started to grow and develop over these last few months. In fact, it's and I think I've said this before, but it's amazing these concepts that I read about and that I teach on and I train on, and how it's so easy to be oblivious to these concepts when you're living it, when you're in the thick of it, and then you have this light bulb moment that's like, oh yeah, right. And so one of those concepts is, there's a really awesome book called Good to Great by Jim Collins, and he talks about this concept of the flywheel, and how the flywheel, it's kind of like the way I think of the flywheel is if you've ever seen Wheel of Fortune. If you are 80 years old and you watch Wheel of Fortune, or you're aware of Wheel of Fortune, they have like the wheel that they grab and they spin it and they try to get a good spin. And I always think about how, at first as they're grabbing it, it's kind of a slow pull, and then they jerk on it and it totally spins and gets going. And the flywheel is kind of a similar concept. You have this wheel that you're kind of starting to crank and get cranked up and get turned on. And as it turns on and as it builds momentum, it starts to run on its own, right? It's actually not unlike a steam engine on a train. They are burning just enough coal to get the engine running, and then at a certain point, its own energy causes it to continue to run. And not that you don't have to continue to feed that and grow that and develop that, and the same thing for your business. Not that you don't have to continue to fuel your business. But there comes a point where momentum is kind of self-sustaining, and it's been really exciting to see that happen with my business, where these relationships that I have been building and developing, it's been fun to see some of those things develop. And what I was saying a second ago, it's funny how you kind of forget that when you're in the thick of it, right? Because when I first started my business, when I first filed the LLC for good advice, and I thought, I had all these dreams and ambitions for, I'm going to get all these customers my first week, and then suddenly the first week goes by and no one calls me. It's like, well, dang, what am I doing wrong, right? But I've been remembering, especially over the last few weeks, as people have been calling me versus me calling them, and as I've started to see these relationships start to pay off, I'm remembering this concept of the flywheel, and especially at my last company. At my last company, it would take several months. The selling cycle was several months long to actually convert someone to a paying customer. And so I remember I had this company that I ended up working with who the size of their contracts totaled around $100,000. Well, it's really rewarding to get that $100,000 contract, but you have to also keep in mind that I spent around 9 months taking their decision maker out to lunch and getting coffee with them and spending time with them and growing and stewarding that relationship. And I think it's why people get sales so wrong in general, is that, and I feel like now it's more important than ever because we have such a social media culture where people are presenting a form of themselves that is so impersonal, and it's so fake, and it's so, it's superficial, right? It's what people want them to see. And so I think more than ever, people are really enjoying authenticity and you being who you really say you are, right? And so I think that one of the biggest issues with sales, and I see it actually happen a lot in business, is that someone takes someone else out to lunch, and right then and there, they're looking to make the sale. And I think that maybe works in the short term. I don't know how sustainable it is in the long term, right? Because if you think about it, yes, you may get the sale right then and there in the moment, but you've done it in a very impersonal way, which means that the customer doesn't really trust you yet, which means that the process of actually delivering said services, it may be awkward, clunky, what have you. But you may also, especially like in a consultative way, you may not fully understand what they really need, right? And so my philosophy in business has always been, don't chase the sale, chase the service, chase the thing that you're actually legitimately the problem you're trying to solve with your customer, right? Because that then will lead to, one, a happier customer because you actually solve what they needed solved, and two, it looks better on you because you actually got some meaningful results rather than, yeah, I made the sale, I closed the sale, I made 12 grand, but now this customer got something they really didn't need. They're not fully happy with it. And then you're not fully happy because, frankly, they're not going to work with you long term, right? So wherever you are in life, whatever you're wanting to see accomplished over 2019, just know there's a process to it. There's some momentum that has to be built up for that. And frankly, if you're working hard, if you're staying dedicated, it's going to happen. So having said all that, that's not the focus of my podcast today. But it is related in the sense of, as you think about that growing momentum and as you start getting success, I was thinking about what do I even call this episode today, and I don't even know what I'm going to settle on whenever I post this episode. But the bottom line is, as you're growing momentum and as you're trying to become, and this isn't even tied specifically to business, as you're thinking about becoming a better person, in whatever circumstances that involves, whether it's getting more in shape or getting higher value relationships, or maybe it is your business. You're thinking about hitting a certain revenue goal. Like maybe you just opened your business last year and you weren't very profitable, or maybe you broke even, and this year you're looking to make a profit, or maybe you've been making a profit but you're looking to double that or triple that, or maybe you went from like a $50,000 company and now you want it to be by 2019 a $150,000 company. So you have these goals that you want to see happen, and ultimately, you're trying to become more successful to actually make that happen, right? Well, as you're thinking about doing that, my encouragement to you, and an honest truth that I've had to wrestle with and come to terms with, and something that you yourself will have to come to terms with, is you cannot be successful in life without being unliked. Let me say it a different way. Being successful, accomplishing your goals, means you will be not liked. And I know already saying that you're thinking, what? That doesn't make any sense. What are you talking about? How could that be? And maybe even if we're even gonna reduce the concept even more, we could put it in a very simple statement of there will always be haters. There will be people who dislike you, despise you, who are unhappy with you, who for whatever reason, they just do not like you. And the same thing's true in leadership. I remember one of the most meaningful things a mentor told me, is actually a previous boss I had, was we were remarking on this sort of celebrity leader that everyone really adored. And I tend to be a pretty discerning and insightful person, and there was something off about this leader. And this is a leader that people had traveled all over the world to see, and anytime he talked about himself, and I'm talking about this celebrity leader, not my former boss. This celebrity leader, he would always boast and brag about these incredible achievements he accomplished, the revenue he brought in, the millions of dollars, and he just really, it was just kind of a constant self-stroking of ego whenever he got in front of people, and people would really eat it up. And I don't know why I was put off by him. Maybe it was just that sort of self-serving ego, because there's a difference between that person and one of the most phenomenal leaders I have ever met is Donnie Smith, who is the former CEO of Tyson. And as I was listening to him, he was talking about all the great people he surrounded himself with, and the people who paved the way for his success, rather than saying, all the things that I did. In fact, if you look back in history, I don't know if you're familiar with the story of Rubbermaid, but Rubbermaid is actually not Rubbermaid. And by the way, I'm sure everyone's familiar with Rubbermaid. It's the Tupperware, the things that it's a phenomenal product. And yet, in spite of being a phenomenal product, the company no longer exists. It actually went bankrupt several years ago. And when it went bankrupt, it was bought out by Newell. And Newell is the company that now actually operates Rubbermaid in keeping the same brand name that everyone knew and loved. Well, as you look at why did Rubbermaid go bankrupt, the reason it went bankrupt is that, there's a lot of reasons it went bankrupt, but one of the most qualifying reasons is when you look at the CEO at the time, the way he described the success of his company, especially in shareholder reports, in quarterly reports, and internal memos, he talked all about all the things that he personally was doing. In fact, going back to that book, Good to Great, he actually has a chapter on this, and he actually goes in and he quantifies the number of times that this CEO uses the word I versus the word we. And what's remarkable about this story is how it's totally lopsided. This person says I 10 times more than any time he says we. He's totally consumed with himself. And sure enough, whenever he left that company, the company fell apart because he didn't create something that could exist beyond him. And all that to say, you have these leaders out there who will really want to stroke their own ego, and they'll talk about all these amazing things. And so I'm talking with... And actually, with this particular celebrity leader, it actually came out that he was having an affair and was doing some really immoral things or unethical things, whatever you want to call it. And it really damaged his legacy. And so I'm meeting with my former boss, and we're talking about this and kind of just remarking on, man, who would have thought? And that's, I'm kind of surprised, but I'm also not really surprised. And it's always stuck with me what he said. It's seriously, to this day, it's informed my leadership philosophy. And he said, I'm not surprised because no one has that many good stories to tell about themselves. And I was like, okay, yeah, well, what do you mean? And he said, the bottom line is this was a person who everywhere he traveled, everywhere he went, he talked about all of the people who fawned over his leadership, who wanted to learn from him, who wanted to hear his wisdom. And this boss looks at me and says, Blake, no matter where you serve in life, no matter where you lead, there will always be people who despise you as a person and as a leader. There will always be people who dislike you, who think you were the worst boss they've ever had. And then part of that is because, we as people, we're fallible. We make mistakes. Another part of it is perception. You have some people who will love your management style and some people who will hate it. I'm a sarcastic person, and some people love my sarcasm. Other people, frankly, don't like it very much. They prefer that I wouldn't be sarcastic, or that I'd be more genuine, right? And so that's always stuck with me because I was like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. In fact, I think about now as a professional business coach, I've had the opportunity over the last few years to travel and speak and talk with different organizations, teams, companies on what does it mean to be an incredible leader. And surprisingly enough, if I think back to maybe even 7 or 8 years ago when I was a high school teacher, and I was the department chair, so I was leading the science department. So I had something like 5 or 6 teachers who were not reporting to me, but I was basically responsible for them and responsible for the direction of that department. Those people would probably, as I think back, they would probably see me as a really poor leader. As I think back to that, I kind of cringe. And in fact, I kind of hope that they don't know what I do today, because they'd probably be like, wait, you give advice to leaders? I don't even remember you as being a good leader, right? And part of that's like the journey of leadership, right? I mean, the leader you are 10 years down the road is different from the leader you are today. But another part of it is exactly what my boss was saying, and that was there are just people who will just always see you in a negative light. It can't be helped. Now, here's what I'm not saying. I'm not saying, when I say, you have to be okay with the haters and you have to be okay with not being liked, I don't mean it in the sense of like complacency. Like, I don't mean it in the sense of, you're a bad boss and, well, hey, not everyone's going to like me, and so I'm just going to keep being an awful person or an awful boss, or you have really shallow relationships and no one wants to spend time with you. I'm not saying, well, they're just haters, forget them. I mean, obviously there's a level of personal responsibility where we owe it to the people around us to grow and develop ourselves. We owe it to the people around us to continue to strive forward so that we can have a positive impact on them. It's that whole concept of, what do we owe to each other, and what's this reciprocity that's expected of one another. And, when you look at healthy societies, the healthiest societies are the ones where there is this combination of altruism blended with mutual reciprocity. And so when I engage with someone, when they do something nice for me, it's think about like Christmas time when someone gets you a gift that you didn't really expect a gift from them, and the first reaction is, ooh, well, geez, I didn't get you anything, right? I didn't buy you anything. And we feel that because we recognize that there's a value in reciprocity. There's a value in this mutual generosity towards one another. And so I'm not saying to be complacent or to just be okay with your shortcomings and to not strive and grow. But it's really on this topic of, and it's especially relevant if you're someone who you're building a personal brand, and especially recognizing just I've noticed that there is this certain frailty of the internet. It feels like the internet is a glass house, or like a house of cards. And like if you post the wrong thing or use the wrong word, there is going to be a slew of people who are offended, right? And it's amazing day in and day out. You see these celebrities, these people who are having to apologize for things said, done, what have you, and some of them are totally warranted. I'm not saying people shouldn't be apologetic. All I'm saying, it's kind of the reason why I don't have a Twitter account, is because the internet is so fragile. It's almost like people are looking for a reason to get angry, offended, and I think part of it is somewhat like this posturing of virtuousness. Like by being offended at you, I am proving that I've elevated myself to a new level of morality or conceptual. I don't even know. It's like I am showing my eliteness in my virtuousness by being offended at you, right? And so I think that's part of it. But ultimately, it's understanding that because of this frailty of the internet and the frailty of social perception, I think what it's done is it's actually made it harder than ever to be an entrepreneur. I think it's made it harder than ever to really connect and be vulnerable with people, especially on this topic of like building a personal brand. I was talking with this woman earlier today, and she's a really successful coach, really successful entrepreneur. She has something like 350 paid customers at any given time. I mean, so she already has the proof in the pudding, so to speak, in the sense of people who, like, proof of concept, she's offering something valuable that people actually want. And we were talking today, and she was saying how even after doing this for so long, she still gets really apprehensive whenever she does an Instagram post, whenever she posts on social media. She always gets really apprehensive because she has this innate thought of, what will people think? What will people say? How will they react to what I am going to say, right? And I even know right now, as you're listening, you're probably, I just know you can probably relate, right? I mean, think about the last post you did, and you probably wrote a few words and then deleted a word and said, well, maybe I'll say this word. Well, I'm going to rewrite that. Or maybe you, I think it's actually really funny on like a social media platform like Reddit, where it's anonymous in the sense of, you're behind your username, and there's kind of this running joke on Reddit of, you'll spend 10 minutes trying to write a response, and then ultimately you just end up deleting it and saying, forget it, because on Reddit, there's like this karma system where people can upvote you or downvote you based on the quality of your post. And so, like I said, there's this joke of, oh man, I spent 15 minutes crafting this response and then just deleted it anyway. Why did I delete it? Because I thought that people's perceptions of me were going to be negative, or they were going to have a negative response. And so I deleted the post so that people wouldn't see it, right? Even though there's no real value there. I mean, people don't know who I am on Reddit, but even through an anonymous handle, we have this fear of what will people think, right? And it's kind of funny to me whenever I talk about a topic like this, because you also inevitably you get the people who they have to prove their toughness, and so they say, well, I don't care what people think. Well, I don't care what people say about me. And yeah, sure, there's plenty of people who say that, who think that. I don't know how much I believe that, though. And honestly, if that's your response, you're probably thinking of what I'm saying in a little bit too superficial of terms, because I'm not even talking about, do people like me? This isn't middle school. This isn't high school, right? I'm not even saying, do people like me? I'm talking more about that sense of community and that sense of belonging that I really believe that everyone innately has. I really feel like every person, we are simply made for community. We're made for being a part. In fact, if you look at the most tribal forms of our ancestors, you have people who surrounded themselves with other people. Even nomads found themselves with close-knit groups of people because, first of all, we survive a lot better. So it's coded into our DNA to recognize that we survive better in tribes and in packs. But also it's this sense of, I'm part of something that helps us feel this sense of fulfillment. It's actually, if you look at why people stay in their jobs, People care more about the people they work with than they do the boss they work for. And what I mean by that is you can be a bad boss, but people will actually continue working for you if they feel a sense of belonging with their coworkers. In fact, sometimes people will work in really awful work environments because they feel like this sense of trauma bonding with those that they work with. And my best friend, his name's Adam. We were separated by like 10 years. I mean, this guy, Adam, if you're listening, you're like 55 years old, man. But Adam is just over 40. And ultimately, the way we connected, we're from totally different backgrounds, totally different ideologies. We believe different things, but there really was this trauma bonding of working in this low-income school system that was just insane that brought us closer together. And so people, they yearn for and they seek out community. Right? And so when people don't have community, that's when they become self-destructive, when they can't, if you talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, they can't self-actualize and become the fulfilling and productive person that they are. And there's actually some really incredible research around this and understanding that we're made for community, we're made for relationships. In fact, going back to my example of the school that I taught in, we taught in inner city Houston. And my perception, I don't really even remember what my perception was of gangs at the time. When I first came to Houston, I think I just envisioned just really awful people who were just wanting to be anarchists, right? But I learned very quickly that, and if you're not familiar with Houston as a city, Houston is absolutely the definition of a melting pot. You have people who, it's almost like a port city in the sense of it's the entry point from people all over the world who are coming to the United States. And so, and I don't know if I really mean like a literal port city. I mean, it's obviously, I don't envision Galveston as this glamorous place where everyone's coming to. It's actually a pretty crummy place. And in terms of like, it's well, I'm not going to apologize. I lived in Houston. It's a crummy place. So, but it's interesting how many people end up living in Houston who are from everywhere else in the world. In fact, the school that I taught at, and I'm not embellishing, I'm not exaggerating this statistic, the school that I taught at actually had over 40 different languages represented. I mean, you start to learn about, and this just speaks to my worldview. I first of all started learning about countries that I didn't even know existed. And second of all, I started learning about languages that I didn't even know existed. And so even in my school, you have 40 different countries represented. You have, I mean, the percent of population is less than 1% white. And so you are suddenly immersed in this dynamic of people who are from all over, right? And they're coming now and they're looking to be accepted in and acclimated into, first of all, the school system, the Houston ISD school system, but also just America in general. And I'll never forget, whenever I was working on my master's degree, I was sitting down with a professor at the University of St. Thomas in Houston, and we were talking about why students in these environments go on to drop out of school or be unsuccessful. And he was talking about, and there's some really cool connections here with just civic empowerment. But he was talking about the students who actually make it. And from like a practical standpoint, we're talking about they make it through high school, they graduate, or maybe they make it to college, or maybe they make it to a trade programmer, or the bottom line, they make it in a sense that we measure success of they are contributing to society, they're making again, very practically, they're making an income and paying back taxes on that. They have something to offer in that sense of the mutual reciprocity to our society in general. The way they get there is that they find a way to become a citizen of that school system. They become part of it. They become part of the community. And so that means that students who come to America who don't speak a word of English, well, that's a very significant barrier to feeling part of the group. It's a significant barrier to actually being one of us, right? And so, and whatever you use to whatever that means to you, I think of it as just being like, we're Americans, we're part of the group, right? And so language is one of the biggest barriers for that. So what happens then is one of two things. Either A, you provide language tools to acclimate them and accelerate their joining of the community. You remove the barrier, the obstacle, so they can now be a part, and they're part of the community. And now that they are part of the community, they're contributing to it. Or you don't provide that, and they never actually enter into being part of the group. They never be productive, contributing members of that society. In fact, they usually will go and create their own society. And this is where Houston gangs are developed and created. And in the Houston city actually has a gang and crimes unit. And I remember being in a training by the person who was heading up this division of the Houston city, and he was saying the majority of these kids who are in gangs, they're not in gangs because they're awful kids or they're anarchists or they just want to do awful things. They're in this gang because that's where they find their sense of community and their sense of belonging and their sense of I'm part of something. And I want to encourage you to not, I feel like when people hear this, because I've shared this with some other people and they kind of laughed at it and they were like, yeah, right, these are just awful kids. And I mean, I've firsthand have taught these kids. They are not awful kids. They're actually really great kids, but they've gotten screwed up because we're wired for a community. We're wired to connect with other people. And when we can't find it in one place, we'll look for it in another place. And what's happened with these children is they've eventually found it in very unproductive ways. They have found it in places where it's not only not productive for them, it's not productive for society, and it's downright harmful. It's where you find people who are committing crimes in order to be accepted in. I don't really know how to become proficient in English, but maybe I do know how to steal from this gas station or steal from this person so that I can be part of the group. I can be part of the gang. And so we as people, we're ultimately wired to want to be part of community. And there's some really fascinating dialogue on what does civic empowerment really look like, and what does it really look like for someone to be a productive member of society. And so in that, if we want someone to be productive meaning they're and you can do all sorts of different definitions of this word. Are they contributing to the GDP? Are they paying taxes? Are they making their society better? And ultimately it's a matter of removing pathways for them to actually become a citizen. And I don't mean like a legal citizen, although yes, that is important. Let's make that happen. But it's a metric of, are they capable of making it to being part of this community, part of this group? When we don't remove those obstacles, like I said, that's when you get the really unproductive behavior and the things that actually harm the society or are in the interests of the community they do become part of, becomes in direct contradiction to the interests of society as a whole. So all that to say, we as people, we are wired for community. Okay, it has nothing to do with likability. It has nothing to do with how many friends do I have on Facebook or how many followers do I have on Instagram. We as people are deeply wired. We need community. Extrovert, introvert, personality, whatever metrics you want to think about, it doesn't matter. We're wired for community. We need people. Well, because of that, because we need people, because we have a coded into us desire to be part of community, what's fascinating then is that as we become successful, we can sometimes prevent our own future success because we don't want to sacrifice our standing with the group or our standing with community. And so going back to my comments on, building your personal brand, and specifically this woman I was talking to today, there were times that she would not be willing to make a post or do a podcast or put something out there because of fear of what will people say about me? What will they think about me? And ultimately, it's amazing to me, just the pure fact of, as you become successful there, you cannot separate success from dislike, from the haters, from the people who do not like what you stand for. It's impossible, right? It's often when we think about becoming known and a person of value, we hope, or at least I hope, that number of people who dislike me will be very small, right? But what I've decided in 2019 is that if I'm going to do this and do this well, especially if I'm going to build my own personal brand, I have to choose to focus on the people who find value in me rather than those who don't. Because the bottom line is there's an expression out there, it's nobody likes a winner. And what the expression means is that when people find success, there will always be critics, criticizers, what have you. Perfect example, the Golden State Warriors, who, I'm totally playing into my own example because I hate the Golden State Warriors. And what's so frustrating about the Golden State Warriors, and you listen to anyone who dislikes the Golden State Warriors, and we all have, we need to get help, man. I mean, we're seriously addicted to trashing the Warriors. But what's remarkable is you have this team that breaks the record for the most successful single season record. It was something like, I think, 73 wins and 9 losses. It was more than Michael Jordan's Bulls. They win more games than any other team in the history of the NBA, and people hate them for it. They say it's unfair, it's not right. It's and I don't know if it comes out of like this spirit of I want what you have and I'm mad that you have it and that I don't have it. But it's whenever people find success, there's always people there on the sidelines who are ready to criticize, judge, and what have you. And I mentioned how I had read an article today that got me kind of thinking about this topic. I was reading about Elon Musk, who, and let's just start very simple with Elon Musk. This is the guy who he created PayPal, he created SpaceX, the rocket ship company. And he created Tesla, which is the electric car company that's really has transformed the automobile industry. So you have this guy who is a multi-billionaire. I mean, he created his rocket ship company largely from his own funding and has been able to acquire many billions of dollars more from other people in order to continue to fund these avenues of advancement. Well, the article I was reading today was a tweet from someone who was tweeting, and of course it's Twitter. Someone was tweeting at I don't know if this person was tweeting at Elon Musk or just was tweeting in general, but this person was saying something like, the biggest problem in our society are the billionaires like Bill Gates, Elon Musk, etc., who are just sitting and building their coffers full of cash while the rest of us toil away and struggle and starve and what have you. And so it was kind of like this typical cliche jab and critique of the financial elite and saying, and all these implications of they're greedy, they're selfish, they, all the things that you've seen before, right? And it's actually really common in today's social media era, especially as we talk about like the 1%. You have people who get very angry about those who have lots of money, even though they're paying more taxes than anyone else. And I'm not even, here's the deal, I'm not even saying that, there shouldn't be a responsibility on those people or what have you, but also you have to think about like the definition of our financial model in our society is that you are able, sort of the wonder of our system is that you are able to make enough money for yourself and frankly make as much money as you want. You're able to do that. And I'm not saying there's not a corporate elite, there's not people who are abusing the system that need to be held accountable. I'm not saying anything like that. I'm just saying that's one of the beauties of our system is that there's no cap on your income, right? I mean, you can be as successful literally as you want and in turn that then motivates people to then go and be successful. Well, what I've been seeing though is that this growing rhetoric around these people like Elon Musk and Bill Gates who are sort of like these fat cat, these people who are just spending enormous amounts of money and just gaining tons of money, and it's not fair and it's not right. And what was really funny to me in this article was it included Elon Musk's response, where he basically said, and I'm just paraphrasing, he basically said, it's really easy to criticize me as a billionaire and to use that term to basically denigrate who I am and diminish what I stand for. You're using it as a term to portray me as this selfish, greedy person. But then the great part of his response was he began listing out the statistics of what he's done. He said, I've created companies that now employ 50,000 people. I buy products, billions of dollars worth of products from suppliers, and that money has now fed 250,000 families. And he was posting the math and saying, I am a direct contributor to the well-being of 500,000 people, 500,000 people. And on top of that, he is advancing our space industry in a way that I've never seen in my lifetime, right? And so you have this person who's doing all these phenomenal things, but yet it's sexier to criticize this person for being rich than recognizing all the great things they're doing. It's even funnier to me when people criticize Bill Gates and they say, oh, what a billionaire, he's part of the 1%, it's totally wrong. Well, Bill Gates has already promised to give away 99% of his wealth, and he's actually created initiatives beyond just the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. He's created initiatives to convince other rich people to give away their wealth as well. And so instead of recognizing that, you have people who are incredibly, insanely critical of it, right? And ultimately, I've just realized that in life, you cannot control offense. Now, sure, you can grow as a person. You can try to be maybe this is where you get into conversations of like tactfulness. I mean, you can be less abrasive. You can think about these things more clearly before you speak. Or I'm not saying you don't grow as a person, but ultimately, to be a productive society, we are not going to be able to control offense, right? My wife, Joy, she had a friend in her life who one day just stopped talking to her and removed her on social media, stopped speaking to her, told all of her friends, hey, I don't speak to Joy anymore. And to this day, this was maybe 3 or 4 years ago, to this day, we still don't know what the offense was and what happened. And Joy's even reached out and said, what's going on? What's happening? And this person just flat out ignores her, just doesn't speak to her. And I think what's so odd about that is it's like she doesn't even know what happened to offend this person, right? And so in life, there's just going to be people who are offended by you, who dislike you, who feel threatened by you, who feel, they feel a need to criticize you. And if you get nothing else from my podcast today, my encouragement to you as you engage in 2019, as you push to be that successful person, as you challenge yourself to grow and develop and mature yourself and nurture your own growth, as you try to be that successful person, you will have to accept that being successful means not being liked by everyone. Being successful means being rejected in some form. Being successful means that you're going to be criticized and critiqued and evaluated and denigrated and all of these things that are going to happen to you. That is part of the price you're going to pay for success. You can't help it. You cannot help it. There's nothing you can do about it. But the beauty of success, and this is my encouragement to you, is stop listening to those people. Be a person who takes feedback, sure. Take critique, take criticisms. Okay, that's good feedback. I'm going to think on that. But rather than putting all of your eggs in one basket of what will people think about me, what will people say about me, instead of thinking that, instead focus on the other side of the spectrum. Because here's what I've realized, and I apologize for my language here. For every person who criticizes you, there are 10 more who think you're a total badass. I'm going to say it again. I mean, seriously, for every person who is critical of you and criticizes you, there are 10 others who think you're a badass, who think you're phenomenal, who feel so empowered by you, who feel such a value of relationship from you, who can't wait to be around you, who, when they're around you, they feel a sense of possibility and optimism, and I feel like a better person now. I have a new perspective now. I can always go to this person for advice. This person is always going to set me on the right path. There are people who think that about you. who have nothing but and let's even reduce it further. You have people, maybe they wouldn't say all of those things about you, but whenever your name gets brought up, they say, you know, that's a cool guy. I like that guy. I like being around that guy. Who have these very positive feelings about you. Those are the people you have to choose to focus on, because it's the same thing when it comes to like the review industry. You know, when people leave reviews, it's scientifically proven that people are less inclined to leave a 5-star review than they are to leave a 1-star review. And so sometimes you get this reverse effect where it appears like your product is doing really poorly because of the number of 1-star reviews. And it's actually not because it's actually not a real metric of how successful your product is being. It's just that people feel more empowered to complain than they do to praise, right? So wherever you are in life, whatever you're trying to accomplish in 2019, whether it's your business, personal, what have you, my encouragement is to focus on the positive people in your life and believe and recognize that, like I said, there's 10 times more people who love what you're doing, who support you, who love you, who want to see you accomplish those things than there are the criticizers, the haters, what have you. But like in all things, and I do this myself, we flip that and we make the minority the majority opinion in our lives, rather than just dismissing and saying, you know what, that's 1 in 100 people. That's 1 out of every 10 people who thinks that. That's no big deal to me. I'm not going to focus on that. I'm not going to think about that. You have something to offer in 2019. You have something to give and to share, and that's in the value of your relationships. That's in the impact you're going to make. You know, whether we're talking from a macro level, like in terms of society and that mutual reciprocity, or on a very minor personal level. For New Year's, I was meeting with my wife's family, and we were all just sharing about the things that are important to us. And we started talking about this theme of every day there's a person in your life who you could be impacting. So how do you stay assertive and alert for that? And I want to challenge you in that same way to be assertive and alertive in terms of the people around you that you could be impacting for the better, for the more positive, people you could be helping, who you could be making this distinguishable difference in their lives. Don't be someone who's unwilling to be successful, who's unwilling to make that impact because you have a fear of what other people will think. You have a fear of what other people will say, and the offense or the critiques or whatever what are they going to say about me? What are they going to think about me? You post something on social media, you get out there and you finally say something, and the first response is, this is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Don't delete the post, delete the reply. I'm not going to listen to that. I'm not going to focus on that. I'm going to be a person who I'm committed and dedicated to making the difference this year, either for myself, for those around me, or for people as a whole. Get after it, grind after it, be thirsty for success, and focus on the people who are giving you fuel in the sense of they're encouraging you and they're being impacted by you. And ultimately, they're different because of you. That's what's worth listening to, not the criticizers, because again, you can't control them. They're guaranteed. It's like death and taxes. You're going to have those people. There's nothing you can do. All right, guys, that's all I got for today. I'll catch you later. See ya.